They didn't just walk away broken, they woke up. And that is the absolute single thing a disordered mind fears more than anything else on earth. Most people think a narcissist fears losing control while they're hurting you. No. What terrifies them is the exact second you stop bleeding for them and start watching them with absolute, unbothered clarity. Let's talk about the psychological mechanics of what happens behind closed doors after the dust settles. When you've spent months, maybe years, giving someone the benefit of the doubt, pouring your empathy into a bottomless pit, your brain eventually hits a biological circuit breaker. You stop fighting for the potential you saw in them, and you start looking at the cold reality of who they actually are. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt that sudden, terrifying shift from deep sorrow to absolute chilling peace. That peace, it's their worst nightmare. The first key note concerning the silent evaporation and absolute indifference strikes at the very core of a narcissist's psychological dependency. In the aftermath of hurting an empath, a narcissist anticipates a predictable cycle of emotional turmoil. They rely entirely on emotional supply, whether that supply manifests as tears, anger, frantic demands for accountability, or desperate attempts to reconcile. This reactivity validates their inflated sense of importance, confirming that they occupy a central, dominating place in their victim's internal world. Even negative reactions feed their ego because it proves they still hold power over another person's emotional state. However, when an empath undergoes a profound internal shift and transitions into complete indifference, the dynamic changes catastrophically. The empath stops fighting, stops explaining, and stops reacting. Instead, they withdraw all emotional investments entirely, treating the individual not with hatred or vengeance, but with the chilling neutrality one might reserve for a complete stranger passing on the street. This sudden, unannounced emotional starvation destroys the narcissist's supply line. Without an emotional mirror to reflect their perceived superiority or drama to feed upon, the narcissist experiences an intense internal collapse. They attempt to test the waters through subtle provocations or unexpected check-ins, searching for any microscopic sign of lingering attachment or annoyance. When they are met instead with a brick wall of absolute apathy, the realization sets in that their influence has evaporated completely. This absolute lack of reaction strips away their control, exposing the fragile, hollow core hidden beneath their grandiose exterior. It leaves them grappling with a terrifying reality. Their cruelty no longer matters, and they have become entirely insignificant to the person they tried to break. The second key note focuses on the absolute terror a narcissist feels regarding the exposure of their false mask, particularly after they have deeply wounded an empath. From the very beginning of any dynamic, a narcissist invests an immense amount of energy into curating and protecting a pristine public persona. This fabricated image is designed to portray them as endlessly charming, deeply empathetic, highly competent, and perpetually the victim of everyone else's shortcomings. They construct this elaborate facade not just to fool the outside world, but to shield their fragile, deeply inadequate true self from scrutiny. When they inflict severe pain on an empath, they rely heavily on the unspoken rule that the empath's inherent grace, discretion, and desire to keep the peace will protect the narcissist's secrets. They assume the empath will absorb the blow in silence, protecting the abuser's reputation even while bleeding from the wounds inflicted behind closed doors. However, the moment an empath steps out of the fog of manipulation, the protective barrier of silence begins to fracture. The narcissist's greatest and most paralyzing fear is that the empath will finally drop the veil and reveal the chaotic, manipulative, and emotionally abusive reality of who they are to the people who matter: friends, family, colleagues, or new supply sources. This is not merely a fear of social embarrassment or wounded pride. It is an existential dread of absolute exposure. If the mask slips permanently, their entire fabricated world collapses, and the carefully constructed house of cards comes tumbling down. They know that an empath possesses a clear, accurate, and deeply observant understanding of their psychological flaws because the empath spent months or years decoding their behavior. When the empath stops playing the protective custodian of the narcissist's reputation and simply begins speaking the unvarnished truth, the narcissist loses their ultimate shield. This impending threat of unmasking drives their frantic post-separation anxiety, forcing them into defensive maneuvers because they know that once the truth is out, their game is permanently over. The third key note centers on the terrifying concept of irreversible finality, specifically the moment an empath slams the door shut for good. Narcissists operate on the fundamental assumption that they are entirely indispensable and that everyone they discard or mistreat will forever leave a back door cracked open, waiting for their return. They bank heavily on the empath's natural capacity for forgiveness, patience, and boundless second chances, viewing these virtues not as strengths, but as weaknesses to be exploited whenever it suits their convenience. Throughout the relationship, they push boundaries, test limits, and inflict repeated emotional injuries, secure in the unspoken belief that they can always charm, manipulate, or gaslight their way back into the empath's life whenever they run low on supply or need a safe harbor. They treat the empath like a revolving door, stepping in and out at will without consequence. However, every empath has a finite threshold for mistreatment, a psychological tipping point where the capacity to endure is completely exhausted. When that invisible line is finally crossed, a profound and permanent shift occurs within the empath's psyche. The endless patience evaporates overnight, replaced by a cold, unwavering clarity and an absolute resolve. When the empath locks the door, they do not just walk away. They seal every possible entry point, cutting off communication, blocking access, and erasing the narcissist from their future entirely. This sudden, unyielding finality shatters the narcissist's core illusion of omnipotence and perpetual control. They attempt their usual playbook of hoovering, sending sentimental reminders, or playing the victim, only to crash repeatedly against a wall of absolute silence. The realization that the door is not just closed, but bolted from the inside and welded shut, induces a state of quiet panic. It strips away their safety net, proving that their manipulation has a definitive expiration date, and that once an empath is truly done, no amount of grand gestures or manipulation will ever coax them back across the threshold. The fourth key note addresses the profound dread a narcissist experiences when an empath pivots from seeking external validation to engaging in deep, self-sourced healing. In the immediate aftermath of a painful dynamic, a narcissist secretly banks on the idea that the empath will crumble, spiral into self-doubt, and remain perpetually stuck in a loop of trying to decode what went wrong. They expect the empath to look outward, searching for closure, seeking answers from the very person who broke them, or openly struggling to maintain emotional stability. This externalized dependency reassures the narcissist that they still hold rent-free space in the empath's mind, feeding their ego with the comforting illusion that their absence is devastating. However, when the empath consciously chooses to redirect all that immense emotional energy inward, the entire power dynamic flips on its head. Instead of chasing answers or seeking validation from outside sources, the empath embarks on a rigorous journey of self-reflection, rebuilding their self-worth, repairing their boundaries, and validating their own reality from within. This radical self-reliance renders the narcissist's past devaluation entirely powerless because the empath no longer requires an apology, an explanation, or a confession to heal. When the narcissist attempts to re-engage or peek into the empath's life, they do not find a broken individual waiting for rescue or validation. They find someone who has successfully integrated their lessons and fortified their inner foundation. This independent resurgence terrifies the narcissist because it proves that their toxicity was never a permanent defining scar, but merely a temporary catalyst for the empath's ultimate evolution. It strips the abuser of any lingering relevance, leaving them to realize that their cruelty has backfired completely by inspiring an unshakable, self-generated strength that they can never touch, diminish, or control again. If you are ready to stop second-guessing your reality and start understanding the deep psychology of emotional survival, make sure you hit subscribe right now. Let's unpack the rest. The fifth keynote dives into the profound psychological terror of losing the mirror, which is the foundational lens through which a narcissist experiences themselves and the world. During the initial love-bombing phase of a dynamic, a narcissist relies heavily on the empath to act as an idealized reflection. Empathic individuals naturally look for the best in people, holding up a mirror of deep validation, unconditional acceptance, and profound emotional depth that makes the narcissist feel elevated, adored, and almost godlike. The narcissist falls in love with this reflection, mistaking it for their own actual character, rather than recognizing it as a gift born from the empath's own internal generosity. When the narcissist ultimately inflicts deep pain and drives the empath away, they permanently shatter that mirror. Losing the empath means losing the only authentic source of high-tier emotional mirroring they ever had, leaving them staring into an internal void that no amount of superficial praise or casual supply can ever fill. Without the empath to reflect back a version of them that feels grand and extraordinary, the narcissist is forced to confront the chilling emptiness of their true emotional landscape. They realize that subsequent partners or superficial admirers only provide cheap, hollow echoes, whereas the empath offered a depth of perception that truly made them feel seen, even if they destroyed it themselves. This realization creates a lingering, invisible ghost in the narcissist's psyche, a chronic awareness that they traded away the one person who looked past their armor and illuminated their darkness, leaving them stranded in a perpetual state of emotional starvation where they can never again find a reflection pure enough to cure their internal poverty. The sixth keynote focuses on the concept of karma manifesting as quiet, unbothered success, which serves as one of the most agonizing torments for a narcissist after they have mistreated an empath. Narcissists fundamentally operate within a rigid, zero-sum worldview, where human interaction is treated as a constant competition of winners and losers. For them to feel secure or superior in their own skin, someone else must be struggling, failing, or suffering beneath them. When they discard or deeply wound an empath, their internal script relies on the comforting belief that the empath will flounder, degrade, or remain permanently crippled by the emotional wreckage left behind. This belief assures the narcissist that their toxic footprint was so monumental that the victim could never fully recover. However, true karma in this dynamic does not arrive through dramatic acts of revenge or public retaliation. It arrives quietly through the steady, unannounced resurgence of the empath, building a peaceful, thriving, and deeply fulfilled life. When the empath moves forward, achieves personal goals, fosters healthy relationships, and radiates genuine happiness, completely independent of the narcissist, it acts as an unyielding mirror of truth. The narcissist watches from a distance or hears through mutual channels that their former target is not only surviving, but flourishing. This reality shatters the narcissist's foundational narrative that their toxicity defines others. Seeing the empath thrive without them proves that the abuse was merely a temporary storm rather than a permanent anchor, leaving the narcissist to grapple with the bitter realization that their cruelty failed to break the spirit they tried so desperately to crush, ultimately reducing the abuser's impact to absolute irrelevance. The seventh keynote highlights the profound dread a narcissist feels toward accountability without an audience, specifically the terrifying moments of quiet solitude where they are forced to confront their own internal emptiness. Because a narcissist's entire existence is externally fueled by drama, projection, and the constant management of their false self, they actively avoid silence at all costs. When they are surrounded by chaos, shifting blame onto an empath, or orchestrating conflict, they never have to look inward. They rely on the empath's emotional reactions to absorb the heavy, toxic weight of their own unacknowledged insecurities, shame, and deep-seated fears of inadequacy. However, when the empath permanently exits the dynamic and refuses to play their assigned role anymore, the external noise abruptly stops. The narcissist is suddenly stripped of their audience, their stage, and their scapegoat. Left alone in the quiet, they can no longer project their inner turmoil onto someone else or hide behind the smoke and mirrors of a manufactured crisis. This enforced solitude forces them to face the exact emotional void and psychological fractures they spent a lifetime running away from. Without the empath's emotional buffer, the narcissist must sit face to face with their own authentic reflection, a fragmented, hollow identity that feels completely worthless when unobserved and unvalidated. This lack of an audience induces a state of deep, restless anxiety because they realize that no amount of charm or future manipulation can shield them from the quiet terror of their own company, leaving them trapped in a prison of their own making, where the loudest voice they hear is the echo of their own unresolved destruction. The eighth keynote centers on the terrifying phenomenon of unshakable clarity, often described as the psychological fog lifting permanently from the empath's mind. During the height of a toxic dynamic, a narcissist maintains control by keeping their target submerged in a perpetual state of cognitive dissonance, doubt, and emotional confusion. They manipulate timelines, deny reality, twist conversations, and gaslight the empath until the line between truth and illusion becomes completely blurred. The narcissist relies on this fog to keep the empath questioning their own sanity, intuition, and memory, ensuring they remain dependent on the abuser to define what is real. This manufactured confusion is a powerful weapon because a confused person cannot effectively fight back or establish firm boundaries. However, the moment the empath breaks free and heals, a radical transformation takes place within their cognition. The psychological smoke clears with absolute, irreversible permanence. The empath stops second-guessing the red flags, begins seeing the manipulation tactics for what they truly were from the very beginning, and views the entire relationship through an unclouded, objective lens of pure truth. This clarity strips the narcissist of their most effective weapon. A narcissist cannot gaslight someone who refuses to live in confusion, and they cannot rewrite history when the other person holds an unshakable, crystal clear record of the facts. This realization terrifies the abuser because it means their psychological sleight of hand has permanently failed. They can no longer spin a web of lies or charm their way back into the narrative because the empath sees right through the performance. Standing in the light of absolute truth, the narcissist is completely disarmed, recognizing that their power depended entirely on keeping their victim blind. And now that the blindfold is off forever, their control is entirely gone. In the end, the deepest terror a narcissist faces after hurting an empath is not the loss of a person, but the shattering of their entire illusion of control. They rely on emotional reactivity, silence, confusion, and the constant supply of a dedicated mirror to mask their own internal emptiness. But when an empath chooses radical self-preservation, metamorphosing through absolute indifference, unyielding boundaries, and unshakable clarity, the power dynamic is permanently inverted. The mask slips, the audience vanishes, and the narcissist is left staring into the void of their own irrelevance. True healing for an empath begins right where the narcissist's control ends, in the quiet, unbothered realization that your peace no longer requires their permission, and your future no longer has room for their chaos.